Hey YouTube, welcome back to the Tim Reptile channel. This is our version 2.0 of the Bellied Toad Paludarium. Now, we're not only going to be doing Bellied Toad Paludariums on this channel, but this has been in the making for quite a while. Here's some footage from our original Bellied Toad Paludarium, which you'll find on our channel. But the one we're making, or showing you the making of today, is for a friend of ours. They're taking 3 of our 10 Bellied toads once, and this is the build video. So the basic structure of this build was made from egg crate. You can see how we did that on our original Paludarium build. But this is a more basic design really. So we'll just go through some stills showing what we did. So we sort of created an island for the landmass, and on top of that we're building a waterfall. To create the waterfall, we're using layers of polystyrene, varying the depth of each drop to try and keep it looking natural at the end. And here you can see the full height that we hope to achieve once it's in the vivarium. There it is in the vivarium, checking the height. So in a change to our initial Paludarium build, we've wrapped the landmass egg crate in weed fabric to stop large particles getting under there. There is, however, alpha grog under there to help with biological filtration. So here we see the full height of the waterfall with a side put on to help contain the water and keep it away from our substrate and keep it onto the waterfall. And there it is in the vivarium, full height. And then began, in my opinion, the trickiest part of the Viv build, the expanding foam. So we've used aquarium safe expanding foam, as we always do. We always recommend you use aquarium safe products in any of your builds. So we've created a barrier there to keep the substrate on the land. We've put some cork bark in to give it a naturalistic look. And you can also see that there's a pipe on the left hand side there, which runs from the water to the top of the waterfall. And we're going to attach a water pump to that later to make the pump. Here you can see the outside of the expanding foam has been removed to give a better surface for the silicone to attach itself to. You can see how this is done in our initial build video for a Bellied Toad Paludarium. The next step in the process was to seal in the waterfall. For this we used a small offcut of pond liner and secured it in place with hot glue, then trimmed around the edges. It was quite fiddly, but I think we got a good seal in the end. To make the waterfall look more natural, we didn't want just black plastic being exposed, so we used some small pieces of slate to try and give it a better look. We tried several things, super glue, hot glue. Neither of those things worked to hold them in place on the plastic, so we ended up using aquarium safe silicone, as we always recommend you should use. So here you can see the waterfall is in its entirety. We filled the base up with water. We've got an aquarium filter there that's going to act as our pump initially. And this is the test run. As you can see, it looks quite vigorous. The water flow is pretty heavy. And as we close the door here, you can see the problem we had was a lot of splashing coming up on the glass. So over time, we thought aesthetically, that's not going to be pleasing. So we wanted to overcome that, which we'll address later on in the video. So moving forward, now we're going to start making it look like a natural thing by sticking cocoa fibre all over the background and down the sides of the waterfall using aquarium safe silicone. We've used black silicone. You can also get brown and clear. We don't see much difference in it, but black or brown seems to be the preference for doing backgrounds. And here you can see us pushing the cocoa fibre into the silicone. Just make sure your cocoa fibre is completely dry when you do this. We did this by putting it in the oven to make sure it was dried out after we'd expanded it. There's plenty of different manufacturers of this stuff. We don't mind what we get. We just tend to get what's cheapest at the time. I would also say that while using the silicone and the expanding foam for that matter, gloves are a must. They're horrible to get off your skin, your clothing, so you always want to use gloves. There you can see a couple of little patches which the cocoa fibre hasn't stuck to, so we'll be going back with little blobs of aquarium safe silicone and trying to improve those areas. So here's the finished article, essentially, as far as the structure goes. You can see the cocoa fibres all over the background. You can see the pipe on the left, which is now attached to a small 200 litre per hour pump rather than the aquarium filter that it was attached to. And we just went for a trial run here to see how it all looked with the new pump. So we turned it on and the water started trickling. Now the problem we had was that final drop was quite big and it was causing splashing, and also it was quite noisy. So we looked to remedy that further in the video. So here you can see the tiny pump that we're using. It takes almost no space up, but it's doing a really effective job. And there's the pipe that ultimately leads into the background, goes up the background there, pops up at the top, and supplies the water for the waterfall, which you can see there. What we found was moving little bits of slate around or adding or taking them away had massive effects on the drops. So this is what we're going to have to put our pump in. So the pump needs relatively clean water in order to operate. So we've made a filter in effect. So we've got a small bit of Tupperware, put some holes in the top to allow water to flow in. The pump will go at the bottom. So we need to make sure water going into the inlet is as clean as possible. The space we have here doesn't allow for a large amount of biological filtration. However, the sponges will allow for some of this, plus mechanical filtration. So here you can see us cutting the sponges to size. We've made a template out of one bit of sponge. We just cut around that, and we'll have a fine, a medium and a coarse sponge put in the filter to keep the water clear. Whilst it doesn't allow for a large amount of biological filtration to occur, we have got alpha grog under the land within this build to allow bacteria to colonize and hopefully give us some biological filtration as well. It can be a bit tricky cutting these sponges because we've got to try and allow the sponges to get around the pipework and the cabling. So here we see how it works. We've got a base that the Tupperware will sit into, the pump goes in, the sponges will then go in, the lid can go in, and that's the pipe leading to the waterfall. We think we just about cracked it there. And here we see it hooked up to the waterfall. We're pretty happy with this, but you can see my solution for that final drop. We did try having sponge below for it to land onto, and then I think it was my partner said, why don't you affix it directly under the waterfall? So that's what we did. So it's attached to it, sort of diffuses the water for that final drop, reduces the impact of the water hitting the water, so there's less splashing, a lot less noise. And I've cut little slits in there because it's not going to look very natural having sponge there. We're going to attach moss into there, and hopefully the moss will grow well and give us a good look. So here we've got the final installation. You can see one of the issues we have with these filters, we've got a similar sort of thing on our first build, is that they don't sit nicely. The lids don't sit nicely either. It's not something we've overcome. If you've got any ideas, drop us a message in the comments below. But in order to get it to sit flat, we made something. So it was a small piece of, well, a smaller bit of Tupperware attached to a piece of slate. Then once the sand's on top of that, it should make it sit nicely and square in the paludarium. Here I'm just taking the lid off the Exoterra to run the cable through the holes at the top of the back. So a problem we had with our first paludarium was we tried to make a removable background that went right to the top of the tank. What we were ultimately left with was a gap of a couple of mil. Now, the problem we have is crickets can get up there, but our fibre-bellied toads can't. They climb up there, they try and get them, but it's a harbourage for the crickets. So what we decided to do with this was leave a larger gap so the crickets can certainly get up there, but so can the fire-bellied toads, and they can predate on them at the top. There shouldn't be any harbourage for the crickets. So we just get the lid back on here. So the first thing we're going to do is focus on the landmass. So we're going to be putting a substrate in. It's a substrate that we've made ourselves from various components. Now, the first thing we're going to put down on top of the weed fabric is going to be some charcoal. Now, we use charcoal that is just lumpwood charcoal from a DIY store, your supermarket, what have you, but you've got to make sure it's just pure lumpwood charcoal. The briquettes have chemicals in which act as a propellant to allow things to burn better. So here you see me just getting the charcoal in. We smashed it up previously, it's quite messy, so probably best if you wear gloves. I got away with it quite lightly here. So we've got a layer of charcoal there. It's to add as filtration for the water that's flowing through the landmass before it goes through the weed fabric and ultimately back into the water below. Whether it's necessary or not is up to you, but for the small cost, we already had the charcoal. I thought I'd put a charcoal layer in to this build. And then I start adding our substrate. So the substrate's going to be a growing media for the plants that we add. It's going to be a home for the custodians in our cleanup crew, namely tropical white isopods and springtails, and what we're going to add in here. So it's a mixture of cocoa fibre brick, topsoil which has been sterilised in the oven, leaf litter, sand and sphagnum moss. I aim for roughly 50% soil type components, namely the cocoa fibre and the topsoil, and 50% botanicals, so the sphagnum, the leaf litter, things that are going to rot down. Another thing you could think of adding is tree fern, which is quite expensive, but I didn't think it was necessary in this build. It does keep the substrate light and airy, and takes a long time to decompose. So you've got several biological components that decompose at different times. Trying to build up the substrate at the back to give a sloping appearance and give a sense of depth as well. So first plants to go in, and it's a mat of baby tears. This I harvested from our first build. It's growing brilliantly. What I did find with the first build was some plants seem to die back and then grow back in a different form, in a different way. So initially when you put a plant in, you might see some die back, but don't worry, bear with it. If you see some signs of life, it may well come back. So I'm just tipping the soil and the water out of the tub that the baby tears came in, because when we harvested it, we also harvested plenty of springtails and tropical white isopods with it. This matting is going to help retain moisture in the substrate, but we wanted one other plant, so we went for something big or bigger, which would be a fern, same as we've got in our first paludarium build. This, I believe, may be Asplenium antiquum or a similar species. It's been quarantined. There's no bugs, there shouldn't be any fertilizers, no chemicals on it. It's been quarantined for 3 or 4 months in a plastic tub in the same sort of mixed substrate as we're using in the paludarium. I'm no gardener, so hopefully it takes. It's just sort of plonked in there, watered, hope for the best, I'm afraid. So I could do a video on quarantining the plants. I've got loads of plants in quarantine ready to use for the various builds that we've got planned. If you'd like to see that sort of thing, drop me a comment below, and considering subscribing to see our subsequent builds after this. We've got a few vivariums here, we've got a lot of equipment, we just need the time to get them up and running. So the final bit of the planting on the landmass certainly is going to be adding some leaf litter. Now leaf litter is important again as an environment for your custodians, the springtails and the isopods, but also it's important because it will rot down over time and supply food to your plants. And there you can see me just trying to wedge in a few leaves at the back. Wouldn't work so well perhaps at the front on top of the baby tears, but I'm just wedging some underneath. It'll be interesting when we revisit this in a month to see how it's all growing in and it's going forward. So in the water I'll be planting some epiphytic plants. That's plants that don't need a substrate to grow into. They'll just be attached with super glue to the piece of wood. I'll be using small bits of Java fern, which will hopefully grow, and some moss, some Java moss, which I hope will colonize the wood also. But on the land, we're hopefully going to be adding some moss. I've got some Java moss and some locally collected but quarantined mosses that I've put into a bowl here. Snip up small. You could use a blender for this bit actually, but you want it all very small. I've added some natural Greek yogurt to it, and I've mixed it up into a bit of a paste, as you can see here. Now this is going to be put onto the background of the paludarium, and hopefully small pieces of moss will colonize that as a substrate. And in a month's time, hopefully we'll see the beginnings of some interesting growth around the waterfall. Also, we'll be checking the pH to make sure that the yogurt hasn't affected things too badly. So here's the final build. We've added play sand and the water in the bottom. Plants are attached to the wood, as described earlier. And this is it. So we've got a Jungle Dawn LED plant grow bulb. These aren't cheap, but they should yield some really good results for plant growth. Later on, when the toads are added in about a month's time, we'll be adding a low percentage UVB bulb as well, a compact one, because this is for a compact hood of the Exoterra. The water's a little bit murky despite having cleaned the sand before putting it in. There you can see the epiphytic plants, Java fern at the back and a few bits of moss at the front. The white around them is the super glue, but hopefully as the plant grows, you're not going to see that at all. There's the sponge. You can see the little slits. I've put Java moss into them. Hopefully that'll start colonizing. And the moss on the side with the yogurt. As I said before, we're going to check the pH with that. I wouldn't do that with an amphibians in the paludarium already. But hopefully this all grows in. Look forward to revisiting it in about a month's time. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. Please consider liking, giving a comment, any constructive criticisms, and consider subscribing, because hopefully we'll be doing a lot more videos, not just on fire-bellied toads, I hasten to add. I've got several species I want to keep, and I've got the vivariums here. It's just a matter of time, money and effort to get them done. So thanks for watching. Hope you've enjoyed, and as I say, please give us a like, leave a comment and consider subscribing. Thank you.